Welcome to our Pitch for Capital lunch and learn show, where we delve into the world of investors and founders of future innovations. We discuss upcoming Pitch for Capital demo days, the start of 30 days of private investor meetings, and mentoring for registered founders who have between $100,000 and $20 million in revenue in the last 12 months. Registered founders and event supporters are scheduled to appear on the show. Also, founder demo days are live streamed on Kern.al. Kernal is a consolidated space for creatives to find, share, and grow startup ideas, to help founders connect with capital and investors connect to concepts and spot where the biggest opportunities are. Step into the forefront of innovation as we delve into the ever-evolving landscape of technology, blockchain, AI, sustainability, smart cities, and more. And everyone registered gets to relax and network at our CEO Social.io Web3 Wednesday happy hours at top conferences in great cities. They are designed to support local venues in a casual, business-informal setting, and we give our attendees, including our members, 90 seconds to let us know who they are and what they do. Whether you're an investor seeking the next big opportunity, a founder with a groundbreaking idea, or a business that supports innovation, we have events and live streams to connect, learn, and thrive. I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed co-hosts, David Whiting and Shai Perednik. And
hi, how you doing?
Good, David.
Shai?
How are you doing today? Yeah, happy Thursday.
I'm fine. Yeah, happy Thursday to you. Yeah. Thank you. I just got back from a trip, but I'm here back in New York, and you're in Philadelphia. So I guess what we can do is thank you for being a guest. We're both on StreamYard, and so we're using this as a collaboration. So this is the first time we're doing this, and so we met through StreamYard collabs, and so we want to try to use StreamYard together to every Thursday on a weekly basis to update people on what we're doing. I'm in New York, and Shai is in Philadelphia. So I'll let Shai introduce himself. How you doing, Shai?
Yeah, David. Thank you again for the time. So nice to meet everybody that's joining the recording or joining live. My name is Shai Perednik. I am a 20-year IT veteran. I've had the fortune of working from engineering roles through architecture roles throughout my tenure, really focusing on Web 2 the last 6 to 7 years or so. I was at AWS as a global technology leader and had various roles within the consulting organization, as well as within the partner organization, and I had led the Web3 and blockchain organization. I've had the fortunate opportunity of throughout my career having really my hands on tech and having my hands in all sorts of Web3 technologies, and certainly on the Web3 side, I've been around since 2010 and had the fortune of working with a lot of people in this industry. So I'm very passionate about the Web3 blockchain space, but I'm also very critical of this transition that we're going through the next probably 10 to 15 years of slowly transitioning from this Web 2 architecture to this new Web 3 world that we're talking about. So very excited to dig into this other stuff today. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Great. And then now we'll do that. So for the first week of our event, of our weekly live stream, I thought we'd like to start off with just talking about navigating the Web 3, navigating Web 3. Content navigating the Web3 movement. So we'll go over this, and Shai, with his experience and background, like he just said, will be able to add depth to this presentation, and we'll be doing a presentation every week. So we're going to start off with this presentation called Content Navigating the Web3 Movement. We'll go from understanding Web3 to challenges and opportunities, and navigational strategies. We'll start there. So this lunch and learn session, like I said, is going to, the first part is understanding Web3. So we'll be talking about the evolution from Web 2.0 to Web 3 in this presentation. And the first part is decentralization, Shai. Web 3 leverages blockchain as its core technology. As we all know, these latest projects are doing, and relies on a decentralized network to establish more open, transparent, and democratic internet. And then we'll be talking about smart contracts, integration of smart contracts, and how they enable automated and trustless transactions, and how they revolutionize the way value is exchanged in the digital realm. And then interoperability. Web3 aims to create an interconnected ecosystem where different blockchains and applications can seamlessly communicate and interact.
David, I'm going to jump in. If we can go back real quick, I want to give the viewers a bit of a history lesson as well, so they understand what we're talking about here when we talk about Web3, right? So the important part is the first one that David was talking about around decentralization. When we're talking about Web 2 and Web 3, and there is a Web 1, right? What we're talking about is the history of the internet, or the generations of the internet, so to speak. And the way to simplify it is Web 1 was actually decentralized. The difference is that Web 1, it was about reading content. And so you were reading material from servers that were hosted all over the world at different universities, at different colleges, different corporate organizations. Our data was really spread everywhere at the time because we were mostly only consuming and reading that data. You can think, again, the early, let's say mid-90s or so, AOL, Yahoo, a lot of the sort of reading content and consuming that content. Web 2 was all about the creation of that content and our ability now as a human society to not only read and consume content from the internet, but also contribute to the growth of the internet. That's where we had the explosion of YouTube, Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, Tumblr, Amazon reviews, Facebook reviews, Walmart reviews. A whole part of that is you as a user being able to contribute to the internet. Web 3 is about returning that decentralization back and that ownership back of that data and that content back to the users. But a key part of this new Web 3 internet that we're talking about is the first bullet point on here that David hit on. It's the decentralization of the underlying infrastructure, that underlying data. And that's the really key part of this new generation of internet. Is it's a new model of building and deploying workloads that we're starting to see progressively more and more applications move this way, and we're going to talk we're going to talk about that a lot more in the next coming slides. So thank you for letting me jump in, Dave. You can go next one.
Sure, great. Yes. And then as we move forward, then the next slide is what we're talking about is user-centric design in Web3, hands-on user-centric approach to problem solving, which can lead to innovation, and innovation can lead to being different. And we want to talk about in those factors that get included are enhanced user control and how the web prioritizes user sovereignty, allowing individuals to have greater control over their data and digital identities. And then improved security, the use of cryptographic principles and decentralized storage enhances security and the privacy of users that are on Web3 applications. And then the user-friendly interfaces, that's one of the things that we have to talk about, making this more accessible with user-friendly interfaces, how right now developers are actively working on creating more user-friendly interfaces to improve the overall websites, user experiences, and facilitate mass adoption. You can comment on that, Chuck.
So I think, yeah. So I like to give an example of the enhanced user control. Right, we think about today, especially if you think about the youth. There's not really a loyalty to platforms, and there's not really a loyalty to the data. But let's think of a common example. We all go to the doctor. When we go to the doctor, right, often we may switch to a different doctor. We may go to a specialist provider doctor. Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually control what records those doctors saw? I have doctors that I don't see for the last 10 years. They still have my medical records. They still have all my information. So the ability of Web3 is about ownership of that data. The ability for you to go to a doctor, and as soon as you stop seeing that doctor, revoking the access to that data. You're not necessarily pulling that data back. You're not necessarily hoarding that data anywhere, right? We still have very much decentralized and distributed data. But what you're doing is you're pulling back the permission, right? The ability for that doctor to access that data, that information. And that's the enhanced user control. It's the ability for me to decide not only what doctor can see, but what can that doctor see. So if they are a back doctor, they don't probably need to see anything with my mental health. They probably don't need to see anything with any other things that don't relate to back pain or back problems. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about user control, is really being able to give users the control that they're looking for today so that they can move between different applications and different use cases and still be still owning that underlying data that they have today.
Yes. Right. Yes. That's a great way to encapsulate that, because that's what's going on a lot of different platforms right now, and yes, and being different. There's different platforms. There's Polygon, which and then there's Solana, and then there's Ethereum, and then there's Bitcoin, and then there's different practices. There's different ways that you can connect your projects to those different ways to tokenize the projects, and then get them funded through tokenization. We'll talk about those different projects as they come up.
Yeah, and that's part of the freedom and control you're talking about. So let's jump over to the next slide, and I'll walk through a couple more examples, and then we'll jump into that freedom and control. So part of what we're talking about here is the ability for users, right? When it comes to decentralized finance. So today, if I go to my banks, if I'm using any kind of banks, I have to go through a registration process. I have to move funds into those banks. That's what we're talking about when we talk about freedom and control and the user to do anything that they want. Is if you use your funds and you have your funds, you should be able to use a financial protocol and be able to move between those financial tools as you wish and want to. And actually, that's the biggest part of why we've seen a boom over the last better part of 4 years. Is because back in 2020, we had something called DeFi summer, where we saw a lot of liquidity and a lot of cash or capital come into the ecosystem. What that did, what the DeFi or financial primitives did, is establish a foundational base so that then you can start building a whole bunch of new kinds of applications on top of that, because now the liquidity and the finances were in the network. One of those key use cases that we saw after the financial sort of revelation in 2020 with DeFi summer is the whole concept of non-fungible tokens. Now, just real quick, an aside, a token is a representation of a particular asset on chain. So a token could be a currency, it could be a security or commodity, very similar to Tesla or Amazon or Apple. You could also have securities on chain representing Polygon was mentioned before, Bitcoin, Ethereum. All those examples are in some cases currency if they're used for the underlying network, or a token being used on a network for a particular use case. In the case of a non-fungible token, the idea is that it's a unique token. It's not fungible. Only one of them exists. So we've seen NFTs a lot relate to art. The challenge with art is that it's in the value of the beholder. NFTs are a better example of NFTs are when we think about a digital receipt. The ability to prove that you bought something and have a third party that can give an attestation that you really did buy that thing, right? So that thing that you bought may be $200 Jordans that then get you into a basketball game for a discounted rate. It might be a receipt that you completed a certain academic schooling or a certain vocational schooling for, let's say, welding as an example. And now you want to go and be a welder at a construction yard. You could show your NFT and prove that you do have that welding certificate. And so those are the two really big use cases that we saw over the last probably better part of 4 years. And then we had, and I'll hit the final one here, is around the DAOs, or the decentralized autonomous organizations, and the ability really of an organization to form in a decentralized way and conduct its normal voting and business operations, but do so on a blockchain network. So that way, let's say if David and I are part of a business and we're making a business decision to go invest X amount of dollars in something, that decision is on chain, and that vote is on chain as well. And so there's a record of that. So that's part of what DAOs give us, is this ability to have a decentralized organization or autonomous business or autonomous operation that is governed by a DAO. I'll pause there. David, anything you want to jump in before we move on?
Well, that's good. That's great. Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
and then
now
we're talking about Web3, and I guess I'll start contributing here. But yeah, to go back to what you're saying, art is one example, real estate is another example. Tangible assets that can be tied back to digital assets, and digital twins. Those are the things that can really get resonance with the consumer and users. I'll just put that in there as my background in accounting. And but don't forget that some of these NFTs are subject to tax, and sales tax and income tax. So that's what we're doing this. We're not giving any financial advice or anything like that, but my background is in accounting, and we do digital tax work. So I just want to throw that in before we moved on to the next slide. And we're talking also about Web3 and digital liberation now, freedom and control. Web3's promise of freedom and control over digital assets and identities represents a paradigm shift in centralized authority to individual empowerment. And then also that brings innovation and responsibility. That finding the balance between innovation and responsibility is paramount in navigating the crypto arcade, ensuring ethical and sustainable development in Web3 technologies. And then also to finish that out with liberation is the challenges of adoption. While Web3 presents its numerous opportunities, overcoming the challenges of user education and infrastructure development is crucial for widespread adoption. That's very important. So please comment about that, Shai.
Yeah, well, let's one of the challenges that we see is in that user adoption, right? The challenge is because blockchain in itself is still a new technology to many developers. It's not something that a lot of developers understand. And so when you're talking about building an application, there is still the existing challenge of how do you build the traditional Web 2 side of the application. Now developers need to understand the Web 3 side of the application. Let's go to the next slide. I think we have some good visuals there to help the readers really understand the challenges a little more, because this is some of the roadblocks that we talk about that users face all the time. And so the example I was talking there was really around user education, right? It's a challenge for developers and builders to understand the technology that's in that space. In fairness, it's a challenge for any developer to understand new technology. It's just a matter of how easy is it for them to put into a practical application or a practical example that they can use. And that's what we're seeing a lot of developers really struggle with, that hurdle, because a lot of times the perception in their head is that you need some sort of financing or need some capital, you need some cash there in order to make some transactions. Now, that's not true, right? So one thing that we like to call out when we're talking about blockchain education is always think about test networks. Ethereum and almost every other layer 1 or layer 2 network has some sort of a test network that you can deploy your application, your workload on there with no currency requirements. You don't need to bring money in. It's technically no money because it's a test network, so it's not real currency anyways. But that allows you to play with the technology. Part of that ability to play with the technology helps you understand why there is regulatory uncertainty. For example, if you're building a DeFi application, if you're building it in the UK, you have to, some of the UK laws changed, know who your customer is, and you have to be able to KYC that customer. If you're a DeFi platform and you're outside of the UK, but you're trying to cater to UK customers, does that mean that you have to also KYC your customers? Possibly. And that's where some of the challenges come when we talk about regulation, because when we build a lot of these Web3 applications, they're not built a lot of times for a specific industry for a specific regional market. And often what developers and builders will find down the road is that while their immediate market that they're going after is licensed and they have the right permissions and they understand the regulation, because their application is open to other places in the world, they now become subject to those regulations in those other locations as well. And so that's something that we see developers struggle a lot with when it comes to that regulatory uncertainty, how to protect themselves. My recommendation is always look for partners like Anchain and a bunch of other global security solutions that can help you better understand the activity in your application, so that you can better understand what is it that you actually need to protect and what is or could be subject to that regulatory scrutiny. The other challenge too is just even in your own country, sometimes there's no clear laws. For example, in the US, when it comes to an on-chain signature, we still don't recognize blockchain as a legal signature. It doesn't technically fall under the e-sign laws that were put in place in 1999 because the tech wasn't around then. So is a blockchain signature technically legal binding or not? Again, it depends on the lawyer, it depends on the case law. And then the final one there is the infrastructure scalability. One of the things that developers and builders find very challenging is how do you performance test a public network? You really can't. And you're given hypothetical numbers as to what that application can do. And if you need to scale up the workload, you need to scale up the application. Well, you really can't, because it's not just because you spin up more nodes in the network does that result in better performance. So the scalability approach when we talk about blockchain is much more about modularity and leveraging a modular architecture so that individual pieces on their own can scale up, as opposed to the larger application and broader infrastructure scaling up. So those are some of the common challenges that we see. However, I do always like to look at, right, that with challenges also comes the opportunities. So let's get into some of those opportunities, David. So I'll certainly jump into these, right? The financial inclusion is something that we're seeing in a big part of Web3. The ability for a financial application to be rolled out, and regulations aside, people have access to it, right? My kids could access it here in the US. Now, is that regulatory allowed? What happens to their taxes? That's where you get an accountant, that's where you get a lawyer for. But my kids can't access it, right? They can't access Charles Schwab. You also can't access a brokerage if you're in other countries, in the US, for example. And so the ability for these financial products and instruments and applications to be accessible anywhere in the world means that anybody with any amount of capital can come in and start to play and be part of the financial ecosystem. And so you no longer need $100 just to start your brokerage account. You barely even need $1 and you can get started. Part of the reason that can happen is because of the democratic governance that is happening on chain, right? Part of those protocols will have a governance mechanism where the community is voting on what happens and what doesn't happen, what new protocols they release, what new financial instruments do they release, sometimes even what countries or regions they release it to. And so it's creating a whole bunch of new innovative business models that we haven't seen before, because the underlying tech is given opportunities to other places in the world. As an example, the certificate example is one that I like very much, where you have students that are going to schools all over the world and being able to store their certificate on chain, and then being able to come to other countries and now having a sort of on-chain reputation score that, based on that, allows them to access different things, and then has different models of business models available to them based on their on-chain score. So that's some of the cool stuff that we're seeing when it comes to these opportunities. I'll certainly pause there for a moment.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So now the next slide as we move forward is navigating regulatory landscapes. So we'll be talking about now about compliance and innovation, how balancing regulatory compliance with technological innovation is crucial for navigating evolving legal frameworks in the Web3 space. Industry collaboration, those collaborative efforts between industry stakeholders and regulatory bodies can foster a conducive environment for Web3 development while addressing regulatory concerns. And of course, we're not experts on this, but I'll try to cover, and Shai will try to cover the legal clarity aspects. Clarity in legal frameworks and regulations is essential for providing certainty to Web3 projects and encouraging responsible innovation.
Yeah, so on that one particularly, it's going to be around a lot the tokenization, right? What you can and can't do with your token. Part of the challenge, remember, is, especially if you're in places like the US or the UK, if you're introducing a currency that has value outside of your ecosystem, you are technically competing with the federal dollar. And that's part of the challenge, is we don't have really clear legal description here in the US. What happens if I, let's say, have a gaming application, and I'm giving my gamers rewards and loyalty points today in existing, in-game tokens that have no currency, right? There's clarity there, but what now happens when those in-game rewards and skins and weapons and all those things, what happens when those can be traded on a secondary market? That's not something that many game developers are willing to take on and have that legal requirement or that legal responsibility when their assets are being sold on a third-party marketplace, because then there's other regulations that come into place when it comes to tertiary marketplaces. So this is one of the challenges that we have, is the ability to create a token is allowing industries that did not have to worry about things like secondary markets before or secondary value, the ability to now have those challenges and those problems. It's not an end all, right? The idea is having really good legal team, having lawyers to support you in the regions that you're working in, so that you can understand what you can and can't do. There's that uncertainty, but there's still somewhat of certainty in things that we know we can and can't do. So that's the recommendation, is always work really closely with a lawyer in the regional entity that you're at.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And now, with different paradigms that are out there in Web3 and the economy, there are these factors: disruptive potential. Web3 has the potential to disrupt traditional economic paradigms, like I said, replacing the dollar by redefining ownership, value, exchanges, and financial intermediation. Well, and that has a global impact. The global impact of Web3 technologies extends beyond financial realms, influencing social, political, and environmental aspects in the digital economy. And then we can also cover, and that includes sustainable development. Ensuring sustainable and ethical development in Web3 technologies is essential for mitigating potential negative externalities and fostering long-term growth.
Yeah, I think I like to point at the example here of El Salvador, right? When we talk about disruptive potential, we do have a country that Bitcoin is their legal tender, and that did disturb the country in the case that they are now looking at sustainable development and sustainable mining of Bitcoin through the volcanoes that they have in El Salvador, and leveraging those as the power off gas to mine Bitcoin. And so you now have a country that, before the adoption of Bitcoin, was struggling really in the global market, and was struggling to have a global impact. Now, after that change, right, they've disrupted their existing markets, because now the bodegas and markets and all the commerce in the country no longer has to only use the US dollar or the local currency. They can also now use Bitcoin and be part of that international market and make a global impact potentially, because they can distribute their goods and get paid for their goods in Bitcoin. And so it gives them much more bargaining power as a country when it comes to exporting their goods. Because of that, right, they're able to continue their development in a much more sustainable way as a country, building their wealth off of Bitcoin and the mining off the volcanoes that are there to leverage sustainable and clean power. So I think that's a great example of real world impact and potential that we're seeing.
Yes, I haven't been to El Salvador myself, but I just met someone in Los Angeles who is traveling there now, and I've known people who've gone to El Salvador on some different trips there. So very interesting. Thank you. And now we'll get to the section 3, navigational strategies. And we'll be talking about educational initiatives, community engagement, and partnerships with institutions. How implementing educational programs and initiatives to raise awareness about Web3 principles and use cases among the general public, and then fostering community engagement through meetups, workshops, and online forums, and then partnering with institutions, collaborating with educational institutions and industry partners to interpret and make enterprise Web3 education into formal and professional development.
Yeah, and you said something that was key there, right? The enterprise development, actually. So this is equally as important for us as community leaders to encourage education and drive the awareness in the space, right? That's how we're going to make this change in the next 10 to 15 years. However, I will say also as business leaders, it's equally as important for us, right? When we talk about any type of disruptive technology or disruptive fundamental shift in the way that we do business, and cloud was really the last time that we had this disruption back in 2006 or so. But going through 2008 and 2016, right, continue throughout the years, many companies struggled with cloud adoption because they didn't take the education or awareness very seriously until it was sometimes too late. So I always like to encourage different enterprises and small to medium business companies that are curious about Web3 and blockchain. They see that there's a potential disruption for their industry, to start off with the educational and community side. Start by looking for ways to educate your employees. Give your employees the opportunity to learn the technology, to understand what the real world use case of the technology is. Try to have initiatives around that education so they can do something tangible with it. Encourage them to come up with a disruptive business model or a new business model to the existing business. So you want purpose-driven education that's going to drive an initiative within the organization, right? So people are learning for a collective reason and for a betterment of themselves, but also for the company. And the other part to that is the community side, right? When we talk about any kind of new technology, especially one like Bitcoin or blockchain as a whole, that does have a connection to currency, it's important to build a community around the technology. It's important to build a community around the real world use cases of things, not the financial aspect of things, right? Don't go building an investment club. Build a community to engage each other on the technology and why this tech is important. Why, as a farmer here in rural Pennsylvania, would you potentially want to run your own mining equipment, right? What benefit is there for you if you have excess methane gas that you're looking to do something with? And how do you build a community with your local farmers and your local manufacturing community in that region? Once you do those two, the partnerships kind of start to fall in place, right? The partnerships is all about partnering with the institutions that your knowledge and your community can then go and help and go accelerate those as well. And so we want to scale out that community to be much more of a community amongst businesses, amongst enterprise, and ensure that we're always building with this partnership in mind. It's a very core fundamental ethos of Web3, is to build with partnership and build together.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm glad that, I heard about a few projects, mining projects, Bitcoin mining projects that are going on in Pennsylvania, and how they're moving forward where you are. In New York, where I am, not so much. But, well, that's another day. Thank you for that. And then next, building user-centric solutions, human-centered design. We're prioritizing human-centered design principles to create intuitive and user-friendly interfaces for Web3 applications. And then accessibility and inclusivity, making and ensuring accessibility and inclusivity in Web3 applications to other diverse and demographics, and promote equal participation. And then feedback mechanisms, implementing feedback mechanisms to gather user insights and improve the usability and functionality of Web3 platforms.
I'll jump in and add, right, that the part that I really enjoy when we talk about user-centric design, we do this in many different industries. The difference is, when you're building, let's say, an AI application, generally you can't move your data. Once you use an AI marketing tool, you go develop all your content, your material, your branding, all that stuff. It's not like you can go and move it from one tool to another one and then test and play with that tool, move your branding and your strategy to another tool, and keep moving things around. That's the difference with Web3 and blockchain, particularly in the applications that are built on top. You look at the rewards application, for example, that allows you to take your rewards from one platform to another platform to another platform. If you own the assets of that game, for example, the swords and shields, you can take them from one game to another. So what it's doing is it's enabling us as humans to make the choices that we once made before we had a lot of these algorithms in Web2 world that pushed a certain design onto us as users. And the Web3 world is giving us back the control as users to choose the way that we consume that data, the way that we interact with those financial applications. If I don't like the way a certain application looks or works or governed, I can move my assets to another application within a matter of seconds. I just have to refresh the page and load another page. That's the value of the human-centric design that we're pushing in Web3. I could certainly go on about feedback mechanisms.
Yes.
If we talk about on-chain mechanisms, but so one of the key things is in a traditional application world, right? When it comes to monitoring your usage and your activity, we have to build logging and monitoring tools within that, and we have to build the reporting and dashboard and off that. The difference when it comes to blockchain, because the transactions are recorded on chain, things like voting and all this stuff is always going to be immutable. And so you can't change that underlying data. So the ability for anybody to come in and visualize that data in one way or another, right? Now, they can't see all the details, depending on which blockchain network, there's certain details that you can and can't see. But the ability of the community to get engaged and see the underlying data and be able to get engaged with the product and protocol is a very key thing of Web3, and is one of the reasons why we build communities around protocols and projects. We want to make sure that the community has that ability to give direct feedback back to the ecosystem of the developers, leveraging their on-chain activity and history that we can see.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I'll add to accessibility and inclusivity. I think from the point of view of banking the unbanked, whether you're in Africa, Canada, Australia, you'll be able not to have be involved with banking and the banking system, and still be able to move back and forth and exchange crypto for fiat. And there's different ways to connect Web 2 and Web 3. So it's not really trying to get rid of the banking as it is. It's just trying to update the banking system and incorporate it. So it's just moving from Web 2 to Web 3. And we'll just in the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, and then
we'll talk about ethical. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, David. I was just going to say the point you bring up talks about the ethical part there, the ethical consideration. So go ahead, and then I'll jump in on the ethical part.
Right. Yes, the ethical frameworks, establishing ethical guidelines and frameworks for Web3 development to ensure responsible innovation and mitigate potential risks. Also, that what I like about it is transparency and accountability. Promoting transparency and accountability in Web3 projects through open source development and community-driven government models. And then also, that's very important, is number 3, environmental sustainability, addressing environmental concerns by promoting energy efficient and sustainable practices in Web3 infrastructure and protocols.
Yeah, so it's a really good slide, because the ethical part is a challenge that we have, because part of the challenge is that you can deploy anonymously on chain. You can deploy new protocols, and maybe in your country they are fine to use, right? For example, being able to send transactions to somebody else, and you want to make sure that that transaction is untraceable. You may have very valid and legal reasons to do that, and in the country that you're in, it makes sense to do so. However, in other countries, it might not be, and it may look like you're trying to hide something. So we need to establish some very clear ethics and ethical guidelines around what is permissible and what is not permissible. Now, the key part here is that we just talked about is human-centric design. And so if I may not think that something is ethical, I don't use it, right? And that's fine. But somebody else that might think it is ethical, they may still be able to use it because it's legal in their country, and they can get access to it because it exists on a public blockchain network. So it's it's a key thing that we need to start doing a better job on in this industry, is establishing what are some of those acceptable ethical frameworks and fundamentals, and when do we accept that an exception is okay to make. And when we make that exception, or we allow that potentially unethical behavior to continue because it maybe makes sense for that region, how do we hold people accountable down the road? If ultimately part of the goal is anonymity, how do we keep the transaction or the activity, and then make sure that person is held accountable at a later date? That's a challenge that we still have to solve in this space, right? The accountability with anonymity is a big challenge of how do you hold people accountable. I believe that as time goes on, we will see different ethical driven rules and regulations in different countries governing what somebody can and can't do, and how anonymous they can or can't be. And I think we'll start seeing a lot of guidance come over the next couple of years as to how do you hold somebody accountable while also allowing them to be completely anonymous. It's a challenge.
Yes, it definitely is. Privacy is a challenge. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're talking about, being more collaborative, which is very important. Building a collaborative ecosystem, being interdisciplinary collaboration that encourages interdisciplinary collaboration between developers, researchers, and policymakers and industry stakeholders to address multifaceted challenges in Web3. And that also brings you have to have knowledge sharing, facilitating knowledge sharing and best practices exchange within Web3 community to foster innovation and collective problem solving. And then the support of the ecosystem, providing support for Web3 startups and projects through incubators, accelerators, and funding initiatives to nurture a vibrant and resilient Web3 ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing of what we're trying to solve here, right? There's a very common belief that we're building this for the future. We're not building the tech for today. It's still something that's going to take another 5 to 10, potentially 15 years to become more commonplace, where there are blockchain solutions and our everyday users don't know or don't care that they're using an underlying blockchain solution. And so it's really a very core ethos of the Web3 ecosystem to collaborate, to share code, to be open about what you're doing, to share what doesn't work, what does work, and really collaborate for the sake of pushing humanity forward. Because ultimately we know that once there is a movement and we adopt either the technology or a particular ecosystem gets moved forward, that will embetter that portion of humanity that uses that technology. So we still have a long ways to go, probably about 10 to 15 years before the list that becomes commonplace. But it's very key that we do it building together. Thank you, David, for...
Yes, it's very important that the layer one, all the layer one have collaboration between each other. That's important as we move forward. And that's really basically kind of what we're trying to do here to wrap up this week. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, and I want to thank Shai for that. And what we're going to do on a weekly basis is we're going to have different presentations, and Shai will offer his different insights into what we're doing. So next week, I just want to show the preview here as we move forward. What we're doing next week is a preview, and we're just going to preview what's coming up at the end of the month, where I'll be, and where our next CEO Social Happy Hour event will be. And that is what we're doing coming up in May, at the end of May. And then this will be what we're doing next week, is we'll be previewing behind the scenes at Consensus, decentralizing the future. So Consensus is coming up at the end of May in Austin. It used to be here in New York, so where we did our first City Blockchain Summit event, as a matter of fact. Back in 2018, we did a side event with Consensus during Blockchain Consensus Week 2018. So we're going to continue that, but now with the CEO Social Happy Hours. So we'll be talking about the behind the scenes of Consensus next week as a preview, and we'll get into that next week. And so what we'll do now is we'll close out, and what we'll do is we'll just have our little ending here, and we'll just close out.
That's all for today's Pitch for Capital Lunch and Learn. We hope you enjoyed our insightful discussions and gained valuable insights into the future of innovation and investment. As a legal disclaimer, we are not giving any financial advice during this show. This is for educational purposes only. Please contact a professional before considering any investment. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to our guests and co-hosts, David Whiting and Shai Perednik, for their expertise and contribution to today's session. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter and our YouTube channels to stay updated on all the latest industry trends and future events. For sponsors, media inquiries, or further information, feel free to reach out to us at side events at cosocial.io. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time, and until then, keep innovating and exploring the possibilities of tomorrow.
Okay. Now we can okay, great. Thank you, Shai. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you, Shai.
I appreciate it. Take care.
Okay, see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you.